Hey everyone, welcome to part 28 in this FXS Lowrider restoration series. If you're first joining us, you could click on this link in the top right corner. It'll take you to a listing of all the videos. You could click on the first link or whatever link you left off from and continue from there. In the last video we conducted all the clutch adjustment procedures and then verified it for proper operation. The oil tank was negotiated back into the frame and installed onto the mounts. The ignition and other required wiring at this time was connected. All remaining parts and hoses of the oil system were installed into the bike. The battery tray was sandblasted, then it was powder coated, and once completed it was installed into the bike, completing the battery tray and oil pan installation. In this video we're going to do electrical along with ignition and a few various housekeeping tasks as well as static timing. Let's get started. These rear brake lines were really bothering me and I wanted to replace them before I did anything else on the bike. Started with a proper rigid U-shaped line which would be going right into the reservoir, and I'm going to use that to measure against the existing brake line, even going so far as to screw it in to get the right distance. Measure it up, score it with a razor blade, and then snap it off. I'll then pull this line right out of the bike, and we'll take a reading with a tape measure, and I'm seeing on this line about 29.5, and with another extension I'm going to add, I'm going to make that about 29. The new cable's pulled in through the frame. We'll loosely connect it on the front first. Here's that extension I added onto the back that angles it downwards. And now I'll loosely fit it onto that extension on the back. This will allow me to evaluate the slack and make sure the length of cable that I had purchased is the right size and everything could be dressed properly. Having evaluated everything's fine, these brake lines are tightened down with a 7/16. I loosen and then retighten the other side to get the optimal pitch I want for the cable coming up. I then repeat this tightening process on the other side. And I reconnect the foot pedal now as I open up the reservoir, and I'm going to fill it up with some .5 so that I could bleed the brakes. I'm going to do that off camera, but it was done well enough to prove that nothing was leaking. I'll come back and redress the brakes in a more comprehensive review later. I was just going to quickly point out I replaced this rubber mount over here, this one with the ground connected on top, and there was also another rubber mount over here. As it turned out, this one had put up a fight substantially because it had rusted into the frame, and I had further found out that this is not a standard size thread, so I couldn't just replace one of my extras, so I had to go and buy a special one shown here, and it turns out that it doesn't have 2 threads on it. So the adventure continues for this one. I'm going to have to go and get a bolt for this. I believe it's 5/16, and have it short enough that it goes in without obstructing the rubber mount. We'll do that later. I said way back when this nasty ass screw comes off, it's never going back on again. I'm going to keep my word as we open up this cover to put in the ignition. Here's my Twintek. I'm pulling it out of storage. Been sitting for 2 years waiting to go back in. Pull off this adapter, put it off to the side. I'm just going to put it out of the way, and I remember the strategy of the order of the cables I have to put in so I can fit everything through these holes so I don't have to worry about anything getting stuck in there, but I know that they all fit if you do it in the right order. So there they are. And get the loom through, put a little tape around it to help that, and now I'll just work the entire thing through. Just as I'm about to drop it in, I noticed one of the pieces on one of the Hall effect sensors had broken off. And yeah, this ignition's in a bad way now. I don't know how it happened, but I can no longer use it. A new one commands a hefty price, but Twintec was real nice and they were able to work with me on this. So while I'm waiting for the new ignition to arrive, I'll turn my attention to this connector. This is completely chewed up and I have a replacement for it. It also comes with new pins, but that's not necessary. On my connector, you can see everything's falling right out. Nothing locks in anymore. Just years of abuse. I pull this brown wire right out. And I'm just going to tweak each one of the locking clips before I move it over to the new connector. Just doing this one at a time. One for one. Nothing is changed in regard to the order. Click it in. Move on to the next one. If I did in fact see a shady pin, I would have stopped to replace it with one of the provided pins. So now I'll dress the cable around the starter under the battery tray, plug it into the receptacle, and that one of the brown wire I'll tie off to the bottom stud of the starter. This whole relay and connector is now dressed in. Everything's looking good. Made another trip to Ace. Got that really short 5/16 that wouldn't get in the way of the rubber mount. Appropriate washers, lock washers that I may need. And that'll be everything I need for that mount now. This one. Also got those screws that I would say I would get for that cover for the ignition. And some tiny nuts and bolts for the oil pan trim that I forgot to put on. And here it is. I'm just going to put it on. It mounts on both sides, and I got to get this ignition out of the way on this side to do that. Just do it off camera right quick. See, I just mounted them. Really uneventful. And on this side as well. And with that, I could finally remove that protective tape that I have on this inner primary cover. Now clean off all the residue with carb cleaner. There we go. Now put some anti-seize on the threads of this mount. Then I'll install it in a position. I'll worry about the position of the top bolt later. The replacement ignition has arrived from Twintek, so we're going to get right into the installation, pulling the cable right through the hole in the cam cover. Push it right into place very carefully. We can see that it pivots back and forth. We'll now loosely fit these special screws. We'll go in on both sides that hold the adjustment of the ignition as well as the cover. And these will be kept loose because I'm going to have to rotate this to static time it shortly. But I'll get this cable in this holder right here. And I want to set up these settings that I have off the old ignition. It's set to kick from the factory, but these four need to be set up. We jump to the opposite end of this system. Coil's been sitting on the shelf for 2 years. We're going to make sure it works. We're going to check our primaries, and then we're going to check our secondaries. And we're going to make sure that it's within the proper resistance. I've got this ohm meter right here. We're going to see what the resistance is on the meter. Straight through it first. We'll take a reading. Looking at 0.4 ohms. We'll keep that in mind. And there's a single fire coil, so we're checking both sides separate. And this is showing 0.3, so this is looking good at about 2.6. It's about right for this coil. Move to the other side. 0.3 again, 2.6 on the money. We'll move to the other side of the coil. Take our first reading. This side showing 13.6K. 13.64 exactly. And this side also showing exactly 13.64. Yeah, this coil is just fine. We could put it in the bike. The bottom slot of the bracket is open, so it just sits between the washer and the stud that's sticking out of the bike. And the top slot right here, we're just going to push the stud through to seat it onto the bike. This is not going to be tightened down yet until everything's in place over here. I'm going to start working that ignition wire up through the motorcycle, and you know I'm going to go and change this 3 times since I make this recording, because I'm not going to like how it originally is, but it's going to eventually be good enough. I'm going to make my way up higher, around and through the top. Some of that unneeded shielding has been cut away, but I've added some marine grade heat shrink so it doesn't fray just to the end right here. But I've doubled back the VOES and the tachometer wires, and I've added heat shrink to those and put connectors on them because they're going to be connected under the oil tank here. They're not going to the coil. A new fitting will be added to the VOES cable, and this is an adapter as well to program the ignition. Those two have been completed now. They're connected up. After I crimped each one of these wires going to the coil, I added just a little bit of solder just to the very end, let it wick in so the mechanical connection isn't the only thing holding it on. These all got heat shrink too. They need only be tightened down and this will be complete. So just going to snug them down with a 5/16, and that'll be it. The outer cover of the coil has a retaining bolt here and one under here. Not my favorite part of this whole exercise, but it needs to be loosened so the cover could slip on. There's just little room to work here. So here it is. Just going to slide it on. Now I've got paper to shim it over here. I got paper up here that shimmed the actual bracket that I tightened down. So I removed that. And now I remove this. And we can see that clearance over here, so it's not touching the rocker box when I tighten that down. And we have clearance over here as well. It's very finicky to tighten this thing, in my opinion. And that's the coil installed onto the battery. New battery has arrived, but I'm going to stage everything with the old battery. I don't have to worry about shorts. This one is dead, but on the left side is ground, and the right side is positive. Left side, there's little room to work, but it's pretty easy to understand. The right side, we have a combination of direct connect. Also have the main breaker coming off of the battery as well. What I've got here is pretty close to original, but it's kind of a crappy design in my opinion. The way this branches off, I've got a pad back there to protect everything on the oil tank. That's why I have that. I have added a charger tending cable into the mix. To complete the positive connections, I'm going to need to install the voltage regulator. So I'm going to drop it back in the front here on the bracket. Come around from under the bracket and plug it into the receptacle. And then drop in the 2 support bolts. This wire will be fed under. It'll follow the brake line and the hose coming up here through these other cables in this harness, making its way up top towards the battery. And here at the battery, it'll connect right over here. I've seen diagrams showing it before or after the breaker. Mine was connected after the breaker. I'm just going to put it right back on there. Never had a problem before. So we got our negative to the chassis and all our positives here on the right hand side. Drop the new battery now on the holder. It comes with 2 new screws. I did the negative side first as there's very little room to work. There's very little slack, and I had to use a 10 mil and just make my way through with the screw until I was able to get it all the way in. Everything was then connected on the positive side, including the charging cable just under the seat. Slide everything back onto the tray. Now I'm going to top off this battery because it's new. In the meantime, I cleaned up the tail lamp, and here's the petrified shrunken seal that used to be in there. And I've replaced this with a brand new seal. We're going to put this in now. It's kind of a foamy seal, and I'm going to press it in position. And I've polished and cleaned this tail light. Looks almost new. It came out really nice. We're just going to drop this lens right back into place. Screw it right back in. Small project that cleans up the back rather nice. Battery was topped off in under a half an hour. We'll continue with the project now. I'm going to put the key in first time in a couple of years. 1 click turns it on. 2nd click turns on the lights, but the lights never turned on, and I isolated it to this 1 wire that had broken off. So we could see here where it fell out, and I'm just going to reattach the repaired wire. It was easy to troubleshoot with the schematic. So here's the 2nd key turn, and there's the high beams. And here we can see with the speedometer I temporarily put in, and you actually saw the tachometer move. There's the high beam indication lamp. High beam off. There's the neutral and oil pressure lights on. There's the tail lamp. I'll go around and hit the brake. And there's the brake light. Here's the horn. And here's a blip right there. That was for the ignition. I used an 8mm to open the bolt for the timing inspection hole, cleaning it with some canned air first. We're going to look for the straight line on the flywheel to annotate top dead center. I've cable tied the clutch handle to engage it to make this job a bit easier. And I'm slowly rotating through with a small breaker bar. And I'm making my way around. And right here we're coming up on the first marker. And that's 35 degrees. And I keep going. And there we go. That's top dead center. My breaker bar shows us to be at around 630. In order to make sure that this is actually on the compression stroke, I'm going to use my thumb over the spark plug hole as I rotate through, and it's either going to cause vacuum, nothing, or it's going to build up pressure. And then we see that's vacuum right there. So we're going to keep turning. Right now we just got nothing. And now it's starting to build up pressure. Lots of pressure. Yeah, this side is top dead center. So now I just align up that slot to the inspection hole. Make sure I put my dust cap back over the spark plug hole. Now that I'm done, I'll also loosely fit this back in. Hit the run switch. And now we're going to make sure that we have deflection in both directions. In a little bit, the status light will become available. And as I turn it anti-clockwise, it comes on, and then at one point it comes off. And you could hear the spark click in the background, very faint. Just turn it very slow. You're using both hands. Right there. Do one more time. I'll just lock it down right there. Just snug it with a screwdriver. And that's it. This is static timed. This is ready to go. I've repainted my mark on the inner primary and marked top dead center here on the stator cover. One of the benefits of a belt drive is you could view timing without opening the inspection hole. Now I'm going to rotate the engine back 35 degrees until we have the 35-degree mark perfectly centered. I'm just going to give it a couple of taps to get it right there in the center of the window like that. When these dry, I'll clean up the streaks with an emery stick. But there we go. I put a T on this one to annotate the advance. And now we'll close up the inspection hole. We're done with this. We'll finish off this chapter by putting on the battery cover, which I've cleaned and polished. And this is the front cover. And then there's a top lid that goes on top of that. And finally, there's a bracket that wraps around with a hook. And the other side has a screw. And this has a nylock. So we're just going to turn this up and then ratchet it down with a wrench. There we go. And that concludes chapter 28. All the electrical is done. All the ignition's done. I hope you found it enjoyable, entertaining, and informative. Hit that like button down below. Helps me a lot when you do. And hit that subscribe button for more videos like this when they come out. When the next video comes out, a link will be posted in the top right. Again, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Would you like to reply?